Good evening. This is Simply Frank, and I'm Frank. Tonight, we'll look at governance issues with the latest highlight, the revelation by outgoing U.S. Ambassador Michael Gonzalez about the alarming rate of corruption in government. So many other, governance, issues of concern with 3 months before the elections. My guest, Linda Kasonde, Executive Director, LCK Freedom Foundation, and at the same time, governance issues. My pleasure.
Thank you, Uncle Frank. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you look good.
Thank you.
I would have thought you would be very stressed considering so many issues you're dealing with.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Let's talk about your organization first, what it is all about. And I've known you for many years. You're always on the side of the people. I'm not saying you're the only lawyer. There are others out there, but you've spent a lot of time on issues related to the goodness of a human being. Where does that come from? And first, the organization and what I've said.
Thank you. So our organization is called the LCK Freedom Foundation, and it's an organization to promote and protect human rights, constitutionalism, and the rule of law in Zambia. But our main focus in terms of achieving that goal is on strategic and public interest litigation to achieve those aims. And also we have got grander plans of making sure that the young lawyers who are coming up also take interest in constitutional matters and carry the torch forward going into the future. This interest in human rights and constitutional law, I think, has stemmed from my education. I went to a secondary school in Swaziland, which came out of the anti-apartheid movement. So it was very much an activist school. And I think that's really where my interest peaked. And then, of course, through my studies, I studied a topic called civil liberties at university. Yeah.
Excellent. I was going to, ask this question later on in the program, but since you've made reference to human rights, there was supposed to be a massive and international conference on human rights in this country. I tell you, we were all excited. Out of the blue, the government, canceled it. What do you read into this? And we have been condemned as a country, by many people internationally. What do you read into this?
Well, firstly, it's really unfortunate that the conference had to be cancelled right on the eve of when it was supposed to take off. People had made plans, booked hotels, plane tickets, and even local businesses here were gearing up to serve the thousands of tourists who would have come into Lusaka. So on that front, it is very unfortunate. But also we look at the reasons given by the government for allegedly suspending the conference. So of course it's now cancelled. So the reasons given were that the contents that would be discussed at the conference were not in alignment with our national values. Now, if that's the case, that is something that should have been considered right from the outset, because the program of the conference was not a secret, and the government was involved in the planning process pretty much from inception, which was over a year ago. And in fact, Zambia was chosen as a destination in 2023. So a lot of time for the government to reflect on whether this was indeed in line with our national values and principles. And to just cancel it at the last minute just reflects very badly on our country. It just shows that, primarily we're not a government of human rights and the rule of law as we professed to be. Because human rights are universal, they're indivisible, every human being has the right to dignity and a respect of their rights. So for you to be selective about who deserves to have freedom of expression or freedom of assembly really does not reflect well on the government.
Isn't this government not worried about losing international, reputation?
Well, they should be, because this has been a huge dent on our international reputation. Because all eyes were on Zambia. People came from all over the world, were supposed to come from all over the world to attend this conference. And their experience has been negative. So obviously, people, the sorts of people who were supposed to come were not only human rights activists, they were IT experts, government officials from all over the world, people who are interested in cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So it was a wide cross-section of people who were supposed to come. And this is one of the largest human rights and tech conferences in the world, if not the largest.
You've just made reference to cyber laws. Aren't these laws infringing on the liberties of people? And why, again, I ask, this government, took this path when prior to the elections, that's one law that they wanted to repeal or remove. What has changed?
Indeed. And if you recall, about maybe 1.5, maybe 2 years ago, the government made a very big pronouncement that it was scrapping the defamation laws, the criminal defamation laws, which have been used by successive governments to, harass and intimidate dissidents in our country, or opposition leaders as well. And they made a big deal about saying that this is to promote democracy and human rights in the country. But really what has happened is those defamation laws have been replaced by these cyber laws, which, if you recall also, the initial Cyber Security and Cyber Crimes Act was passed in 2021. And when this government came into office in 2021, they told us that they would repeal and replace that law with a more human rights and democracy friendly law. But in fact, what has happened is that those new laws, the Cyber Security Act and the Cyber Crimes Act, which are two separate acts now, are equally as oppressive as the previous law. And are now being used. I mean, recently we've seen opposition leader Kasonde being arrested under that law. So we are just seeing the same patterns repeat themselves. And it's unfortunate because we need to move away from weaponizing the law against citizens. We should be promoting and respecting freedom of expression in this country. Because what tends to happen when people are silenced or there's a chilling effect on whether people feel free to express themselves, you'll find that the government doesn't know what the individual citizens are thinking. And therefore, surprises can happen.
Absolutely.
Yes.
As a rider, to that, this government, and I've been around for a long time, I've served all, governments. I know it did happen in PF to some extent, but it's more issues of cases of concern now. Almost everything this government touches is contentious. Let's talk about the amendment of the Constitution, Bill 7, which is now Act 13 of 2025. Very contentious. Now, as if that's not enough, we've got 74 bills taken, to Parliament just a few months, and they have to be dealt with in 10 days. My question is, why is this government so much involved in contentious issues? And as a side issue to that, they seem to do this with impunity. And when these issues, go to court, they usually win. I know there's some clever, lawyers, but really you have to be a genius to win all the cases. Please comment on that and why you've taken it upon yourself to file against these bills, and you also filed against the constitutional amendments.
So citizens of this country are not only endowed with rights, such as the right to freedom of expression, the right to freedom of assembly, and other rights that are contained in our Bill of Rights. We also, under our Constitution, have duties. And one of those duties is to uphold and defend the Constitution. And so when citizens see these things happening, it is incumbent upon them to do something about it. And that's what we're doing at the LCK Freedom Foundation. Now, it's not about fighting government. It's ensuring that government, if you like, sticks to its lane, because, a government is supposed to act within a certain legal and constitutional framework. And when it starts veering away from that, it is our obligation to make sure they move back into where they're supposed to be, which is respecting the rule of law and the Constitution. So that's really the role of citizens. And hopefully governments don't feel attacked, because, that's what the role of a citizen is, to make sure that we're all governed under one legal framework and that nobody is above the law.
Tell me, there's no doubt that certain things are being abrogated. The Constitution is being abrogated by the executive. Are we seeing a situation where the executive is much more powerful than the other arms of governance? And if this is true, what are the repercussions when the other arms of governance are weakened?
So under our constitutional order, under our democracy, there's a concept called the separation of powers, which basically says that the executive, the legislature, which is parliament, and the judiciary are three separate but equal arms of government who hold each other to account. And that system fails where that accountability is not happening. So for example, where the executive does not obey court orders of the judiciary, or even the legislature does not obey orders of the judiciary. And so the system has come under a bit of strain. But this is probably has been with successive governments, because ultimately the executive appoints the people that occupy the judiciary and also the head of the National Assembly. So ideally, each arm of government should be independent and stand strong, even with the face of pressure. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't see that. For example, with Bill 7, we saw the Speaker of the National Assembly clearly say that they would not obey the Munir Zulu judgment, which in other countries would be a constitutional crisis.
Absolutely.
Because, that clearly distorts or disturbs that three but equal platform on which the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary stand. So again, it comes back to the citizen and their role to make sure that when these things happen, they make sure that whoever has, strayed from their path should be put back in their rightful place.
I'll be coming back, to the role of the citizens, but I want to talk about the powers, that are inherent in the president or the presidency. There's no doubt that the powers are immense. At the same time, I don't see any president who'd like the powers to be reduced. How then do you address that?
I think they tried to address it with the 2016
Yeah.
amendments. Of course, the executive still has a lot of power,
Yeah.
particularly through appointments. But we now have in our constitution, it's Articles 90 and 91 of the constitution, which do constrain the powers of the executive. Basically, they say that the executive can only perform or exercise power that is in the best interests of the citizens of this nation.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's not challenged enough. Often, again, we're talking about an arm of government straying from where it's supposed to be. Yes, we need to hold our government to account when it is not acting in the best interests of the citizens of this country. And every action, every measure taken by the executive has to be measured against our constitutional national values and principles. So, for example, in the Munir Zulu case, for example, one of the values and principles that wasn't followed was democratic participation, and also following an inclusive procedure. In terms of allowing citizens to express themselves over a reasonable period of time and in an amount of depth that is meaningful. And those national values and principles were not adhered to in the initial Bill 7 tabling. And of course, we've seen it's now Act number 13. And of course, now we're in court basically stating that the constitutional amendment that is Act number 13 of 2025 was an unconstitutional constitutional amendment.
Tell me, Parliament is very key, in governance. What is your take on the performance, of this particular, Parliament, in line with how they've acted, especially on Bill 7. As I speak, there's an issue of defections. And I think the Constitution is very clear. When you defect, declare the seat vacant. To our surprise, this speaker says, I'm still thinking about it. What kind of an indictment, is this, Ms. Kasonde?
Well, it is a very damning indictment on that institution, the legislature. We only recall on the passing of Bill 7, now Act number 13 of 2025, we saw the speaker dancing in celebration, which, calls into question the independence of that arm of government. So these are all issues that we as citizens need to take strong interest in and ensure that the right things are being done and that justice is done and appears to be done.
Let me ask you about the contents of the Electoral Act, which has now given room to more members of Parliament because of the delimitation. 70 of them. We're talking about a bloated in a Parliament. What is your take again, especially on the cost? And also, do these 70 add quality to the performance of the House? Why do I say this? I've followed proceedings in Parliament. There are some members of Parliament who have not spoken a single word, some of them for 10 years. Now you're giving Parliament an extra 70, an extra cost. What is going on? Isn't there somebody out there who is conscious about the performance, conscious about the cost?
Well, I mean, there are several things coming out of this delimitation exercise. We know, for example, that the whole process was shrouded in secrecy. It was not transparent. It wasn't open. And when you look, in fact, at how these 70 constituencies have been distributed, it actually waters down the voice of constituencies that contain more populous populations, constituencies with more people. For example, Lusaka province should, because it's more populated,
Absolutely.
should have, if you like, a more weighted vote than a constituency that has fewer people, because that's how the distribution has worked. If you actually analyze how the constituencies have been distributed, the effect is to dilute the voices of certain constituencies that are more populated, and to give more weight to the vote of smaller, less populated provinces, for example. And so the whole exercise of Act number 13, the Constitutional Amendment Act number 13 of 2025, was exactly to do that, to skew the provisions of the Constitution to make it easier for the incumbent government, the government that's here today, to have an inbuilt majority, a supermajority in Parliament, which would make it easy for them to pass laws that they want to pass and make any amendments to the Constitution.
Tell me, are you seeing, obviously, there are, people, on the side of the government of the day who are very happy about, what is, going on, irrespective of the repercussions, even on them. Are you seeing now a distinctive divide, of the country on political lines?
Well, I think one of the downsides of the provision of the 50+1 threshold in the Constitution for a presidential candidate to win an election is essentially it meant that presidential candidates garner support from areas where they feel more affiliated. Okay? So essentially, it has split the country down the middle, according to, if you like, tribal affiliation. So in that respect, it was that was a small downside. So definitely, we've seen more polarized politics. We saw it with the Patriotic Front government. We saw, denunciation of certain tribal groupings. And unfortunately, that trend is continuing. We're seeing statements urging particular tribal groups to support the incumbent, which is very unfortunate because we're all Zambians. And we all have a say in how our country should be run. No one Zambian should feel inferior in our own country. And we really need to take back our country. We've recently celebrated KK Day. And I said that one of KK's greatest legacies was to unify this country. And it was done by taking very deliberate measures. When he made appointments, he made sure he tribal balanced across the various regions in this country. When civil servants were posted, if you were Bemba, you were taken to Northwestern Province, or any other tribe was moved around, and this was all in a bid to foster national unity, so that we all consider ourselves as one. And in fact, Zambia is one of the few countries on the continent that I know of where there's a lot of inter-tribal marriages, which is not common in a lot of other African countries. And we need to safeguard those cultural values and norms that we have as a nation.
Let me jump the gun. This question should have been, towards the, the end, post-elections, August. What do you read into the future, irrespective which government, we're going to, to end up, because there are a number of divisive, issues at play, right now.
Could you repeat the question, please?
What kind of future do you see post-elections, irrespective of the kind of government we are going to end up? There's no doubt, following my earlier question, that the country is divided on political lines, even on tribal lines. We have to be realistic. We should not put our head in the sand. This is a reality facing us.
Absolutely. One of the trends we noticed in the previous elections, certainly anecdotally, was that so many youth came out to vote because they believed that they had a future and that their voice mattered and that change was coming to better their futures. Because so many youth are unemployed, whether they have degrees or not. So many people are even underemployed, where they have a job, but it's not making ends meet. And I noticed in the recent stats for we've recently had ECZ announce the number of registered voters. It would be interesting to compare, because I noticed, I think it was 46% of the registered voters are youth, which to me seemed a bit low given the huge numbers of youth we have in this country. So it would be interesting to find out whether that is an indication that the youth somehow don't feel that their voice matters. Because maybe are they staying away? These are all things we need to really delve into. And if that's the case, it's very unfortunate because the youth are the future of tomorrow.
Tell me, since we're talking about the elections, the party in power, according to the opposition, has done everything to make the playground uneven. The party in power, let's face it, is already campaigning, through the president. The official campaign starts on the 21st, and it may not be easy, according to what the opposition is saying. The media is very important. I see the president making a statement, that ZNBC should avail itself to everybody. I hope that it works. Like I'm saying, according to the opposition, are saying the ground is uneven. Even ECZ seems to be compromised. How do you come up with the free and fair elections in this kind of scenario?
It's very difficult, I have to be honest. But I think we also have to lay some blame at the door of the opposition. They've been extremely disorganized and they're not doing themselves any favors. Not that I'm supporting one party over the other, but in a democracy, we need to see checks and balances. And if we have a weak opposition, it means those are the people who are supposed to be holding a ruling party to account in parliament.
Absolutely.
In between elections. Of course, the citizen also has a duty. But again, within the National Assembly, the opposition's role is to check what is happening under the ruling party. And we're not seeing that because they're fighting for power, which is just not in the interest of the Zambian people. But likewise, the incumbent ruling party should also consider that democracy doesn't work where you have all the cards. Because it goes back to that story of the naked emperor who's walking around without any clothes because you're so powerful, nobody feels that they can tell you that you're not wearing any clothes. And that's a very dangerous situation for any government to find themselves in, because there should be a close connection between those who are ruling us and those who are being ruled. And in fact, it's not even ruling, we're being governed, not ruled. When you say you're ruling somebody, it's like an authoritarian government where you're being told what to do. And if we're not careful, we will move from being a democracy where we are governed to being an autocracy where we are being ruled because the incumbent is so domineering and so dominant.
Yeah. The key question, the people, the citizens who elect these leaders, the semi-leaders who abuse them, how can the citizen be served well in a situation like this?
So one of the things I find very unfortunate in our country is a hangover, which I think came from the UNIP government, which is the saying that "boma ni boma," where you put those who govern us on such a high pedestal that nobody should challenge them, even if it's not in the citizens' interests, because that's the government, they're acting on our behalf. No. Under our constitution, it's the people who have the power. And if our government is not performing, is not adhering to our national laws and our constitution, then we need to say something about it. Then they're not all powerful. We are the ones who have constituent power. That is the root of where any power in any country comes from. It comes from the people. And so we must never forget. And we've exercised that power on several occasions in our country, not just at the ballot box, although we've done so very successfully, particularly since 1991, but also in between elections. We only have to recall the Oasis Forum and its role in ensuring that a third term was not effected by the Chiluba government. We saw how the people defeated Bill 10. We've had various successes as a civil society, as citizens over the years, which should always remind us that the power comes from us. It's not resident with the government.
Let's revisit the constitutional process. Attorney General Kabesha was seated right there when I interviewed him. And he said, this government, if it's returned, it's going to revisit the Constitution yet again. What are your fears?
Firstly, when the government told us that they wanted to embark on the constitutional reform process that they just underwent with Act number 13 of 2025, we told them that the timing was not good because we're just about to go into elections. And that when you hold a reform process that is so close to the election, it stands to be tainted by politics, because inevitably the incumbent will try and use the process to favor them in an election year. And that is what we've seen with what has happened. It's really unfortunate. We need to safeguard our roles as citizens and not be passive in these constitutional amendment processes, because we can't assume goodwill on behalf of those who are driving the process, particularly if the process is executive-led, led by the executive arm of the government. Because any constitutional reform process is meant to be people-driven. We are the ones who tell the government what we want to see in our constitution, because that is how we choose how we are governed as a people. Now, when the government told us that they were going to do another constitutional reform process, two things come to mind, or a few things come to mind. firstly, we've just been through a costly constitutional reform process. We had a technical committee that was in place for about 2 weeks. That was an expensive exercise, and has it really delivered on what the people want? So that exercise has not given us any confidence that this new process, should the government be re-elected, is going to be in favor of the people. Because the government has shown us that they're misusing the process to give themselves an advantage. And so there is some fear on my part that the same thing is going to happen with this new process. Because, it doesn't appear that there's a genuine concern for what the people wanted to see in the Constitution.
Tell me, there are fears, that if the Constitution is changed, one of the issues, the government would like to deal with is the term of service, in terms of how many years a president serves. It's a 5-year term. Now, if you win 2 terms, there are people who are saying they could scrap that, and you serve indefinitely until you're removed. The other side of the coin is that the length of the term may be extended. Are there fears? Do you think about that? That it could happen? Is there chances, a realistic opportunity for that to happen?
One thing
what would be the implications?
Sure. One thing about politicians is that they will take a chance so long as nobody pushes back. And in this 5 years that has passed, we've seen a couple of things. So, for example, in the last constitutional amendment, we now see that mayors have an unlimited term, which was not previously the case. And sometimes you begin to wonder whether this is an action to test the waters. We saw, for example, with President Chiluba, when he was campaigning for third term, he never said it himself, but he sent his ministers out there to test the waters, to see, what people's reactions were to the thought of having a third term. And so people pushed back. That's where I'm coming with the history. The Oasis Forum banded together with civil society, with the Law Association, with the women's movement, with the trade unions, and they all said no. They pushed back. Now, the other signal we've seen with regards to this term limit issue is we've seen ruling party of affiliates come in the media and test the idea as to whether or not term limits are a good idea. So these are all worrying signals that Zambians should pay attention to. It may not have happened in this process, but it is a real possibility. If, for example, as I mentioned, we're already seeing that under the current constitutional amendment, the incumbent will have an inbuilt majority in parliament. So these are all real possibilities if citizens don't push back.
Tell me, you made reference, to the performance, the vigorous response from NGOs. Where are these NGOs today? Where is Laz, today to speak, for the people? Where are these organizations that are supposed to be representing the voices of the people?
I would like to believe, according to our history as a nation, certainly post 1991, that when the chips are down, when it's time to rise to the occasion, civil society does rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
And so I can only hope that, particularly in these 100 days or so that we have left to the August 2026 elections, that civil society will band together to ensure that we have free and fair elections, and that the rule of law, human rights, and democracy in our country is respected and upheld.
I just made reference to Lars. This reminds me, Lars has indicated that he would like the law on rep, to be, repealed. Now there's no bail according to the new law. Your thoughts on that?
Unfortunately, I can't comment because we're in court over.
Oh, you're in court over, over that. Let's talk about the contagious issue, which I should have started with, but I love the way the discussion has developed. Michael Gonzalez, outgoing U.S. ambassador, made some scathing revelation, about the extent of corruption in government. He's condemned, obviously. He's been condemned, obviously, by the government. Your thoughts on that?
Well, firstly, let me just say I'm not a diplomat, so I can't comment on the etiquette around.
I am.
Indeed.
Yes, the etiquette is questionable, but let's talk about the message. Instead of condemning the message. Yeah.
This is not the first time that Ambassador Gonzalez has been outspoken about corruption, particularly in the health sector. And if I'm not mistaken, in his previous remarks, he's mentioned that he has tried several avenues to try and have his voice heard and to receive responses from the government, positive responses, as to how they're planning to tackle this corruption. If you like, the positive side of his remarks is now these issues have come to light.
Yeah.
We're talking $4 billion, which is more than this $1 billion that the US is offering us for health aid in exchange for our minerals. So is it making sense? Is it making sense that we are receiving aid when we are throwing away money that could save lives? To me, it doesn't make sense. It means that we can afford our own health care.
Absolutely.
Meanwhile, we're borrowing from people who are stealing from. So things are not adding up. And I think it's incumbent on the government. Of course, they had to respond. I'm not sure about the forcefulness of the response, but hopefully behind closed doors, they are quietly reflecting on what has been said. Because I always say that corruption should really be a treasonable offense. Because you're literally stealing food or medicine from somebody's mouth.
People die.
People die. And so we really should think about how we use our resources for the benefit of the widest possible number of citizens in our country. And really, again, this whole debate about aid has come up again, whether we should now be moving more towards investment than aid. This is perhaps one clear example where perhaps we're not deserving if we're not using the money properly.
Tell me, obviously there's no political will. There hasn't been political will in more or less all the governments, except perhaps, during, Mwanawasa. Why is political will not there? We're talking about billions, of dollars at a time when people are suffering, when cost of living is very, very high.
Indeed.
Why is there no political will?
Do you know the one thing that politicians fear more than anything is the electorate? And if the electorate is silent, they'll proceed
Yeah.
with whatever it is they want to do.
Yeah.
That is why you always have to remind citizens of their power. They have the power. And they are the ones, through expressing themselves expressing a displeasure with things that are not in the interests of Zambians.
Yeah.
That is how politicians respond.
Yeah.
So we need to take our duty as citizens extremely carefully.
I didn't mention, that there's so many contentious issues, related to this, government. You did make reference to the health, Ed. What are your concerns about this? I know you've made reference, to that. Why is there no transparency in such a huge, issue that is going to impact 22 million people?
Well, I mean, I'm constrained to discuss that matter because
again, it's in court.
It's in court.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that we need to hold our governments to a higher standard. Democracy necessarily means allowing the participation of citizens in decisions that are made on behalf of citizens. And so you can't be closed and not transparent about something that has wide-ranging implications for ordinary citizens.
Yeah. I'll give you 2 minutes or so to just speak to the nation. What is your message in terms of governance, where we are today, and how worried, are you that, especially economically and socially, that if we're not careful, we're seeing the emergence of two distinctive, classes, the haves and the have-nots. Why am I saying this? I've seen amazing wealth of people in this country, and I've traveled a lot, and I don't want to be misunderstood. There are some hardworking people here who've earned their money, rightly, and I've also seen poverty, out there. Are we looking at a situation, if we're not careful, if we're not morally concerned, that we could be seeing a distinctive of very wealthy people and very poor people among the 22 million? Take that on board in your final message to the people.
Well, I must say that is already happening in our country.
Yeah.
Zambia is actually one of the most unequal countries in terms of wealth distribution in the world. That means that we have a wide gap between those who are very wealthy and the majority, the overwhelming majority, who live in poverty. And there's very little in between. And that's why we cannot afford corruption, because every resource that we have needs to be applied to bring all citizens out of poverty and into a situation where they're living in dignity. And so I just want to remind the citizens out there that this is our country. We all belong here. No one citizen is better than the other one. And we all deserve a future in which we live in prosperity and dignity as a people. We really need to ensure that whoever is leading us bears that responsibility in a manner that shows that they care for the Zambian people.
Message for the election.
I think I would just say to every citizen that first and foremost, people died in this country to get independence and to get the right to vote. And so it is incumbent on every citizen to exercise that right in view of our heritage and our history, and what that significance means, that we can actually freely vote. And we've seen over successive governments that our vote does matter, and that we can decide our fate depending on how we vote. And so I just urge every citizen to exercise that right, and do so wisely.
I know your relationship with God. What have you been discussing with God, this period? And if we leave this studio, which we're going to do, and outside you meet up with Jesus, what kind of discussion what issues would you raise with him?
I think the season I'm in at the moment is me saying to God, here I am, send me. Because I feel quite strongly about where we're at as a nation at the moment. I think there's some troubling trends that we're seeing in our country. And, I'm just urging everyone who feels that way, who loves our country, to really make sure that we have what we deserve as a people.
Ms. Kasonde, thank you, for coming on my show, and thank you for being the voice of good governance and the voice for the people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This has been Simply Frank. My guest, Linda Kasonde, who is Executive Director of LCK Freedom, Movement. I thank her, for being our guest, today on, Simply, Frank. Like I keep on saying, this is our country, where God planted us, here. The best that we can do is do your very best, and God will do the rest. On behalf of my guest, I'm Frank on Simply Frank. Good night to you all.